Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good afternoon. What are we talking about today?
So today, James, we are going to talk about how to be a better boss. Now we talked a few episodes ago, we talked about bad bosses and we slaughtered loads of bad bosses that we've worked for and ourselves in fairness. But today we're going to focus on the positives and we're going to explore how we can all go about being a better boss and getting more out of our team as a result.
Very good. What makes a good boss then? Oh, now let me put this for me. So, of the bosses you've had then, how many of them have been good bosses and what sort of things do they have in common?
And we talked about this before. I think in percentage terms, I think a relatively small percentage, I would say, were really good. A relatively small percentage are really bad, and then everyone's just in the middle. So I think for me, the art form here is if you're leading people, how do you take yourself out of the pack? Because when you're in that pack, you might do some things right, you might do some things wrong, but you're just in a pack of people and you don't stand out. Wouldn't even probably name half of them, but the memorable ones are the really good ones, the really bad ones. So for me, I think the really unhelpful answer, and hopefully you've got a better answer than me.
Quick.
I think it depends because it's very individual and circumstantial. And by that I mean, if you and I are working together, if we're working in a certain situation where everything is ticking along really nicely and very smooth and very easy, you're looking for certain things from your boss. If we're in a different situation where the shit's really hitting the fan, we want a different set of actions and behaviours. So I think some of it is circumstantial and some of it's individual. So the things that you like in people might not be the things that I like and vice versa. So I think where that draws me to is it depends. The more helpful answer is, for me, it's about adaptability. So how do I adapt to the fact that in my team and in the circumstances I'm going to manage that team, there's going to be a whole load of variety. And how do I deal with that authentically?
And I'm a bit more positive about it, I'll be honest. So I totally agree. There are some who are standout greats and there are some who are standout just freaking desperate. There's one, but we could do a whole episode on him. We're not going to go there. Move on, James, right? But you know what I'm talking about, don't you?
I do.
So I think that if we were to write a list of people that we both work with or for, and we were to rate them from who was the best boss to who was the worst, I think we'd have quite a lot of commonality. I think, I do actually.
You think?
Well, yes, I'm very certain of that. Which is good for this podcast because it means that we will have things we can talk about which are more than just circumstantial. I buy your point that, it does depend on the circumstances. But I think there are actually some things that they've got in common. And actually, I don't need to dwell on it. I think another way of looking at it is if we were to talk about bad bosses, we'd come up with a pretty good list of things we agree with for bad bosses. We would say they were over-controlling. We'd say they were only in it for themselves. They kept changing their minds. They were unhelpful. Those sorts of things. Didn't know where they were going. Weak, didn't stand up to people. Yeah. If we could agree on a list of, I don't think it's worth doing, but if we could agree on a list of qualities on bad bosses, then I think actually we could probably agree on a list of good qualities for bosses.
Well, today we promised ourselves we wouldn't dwell in the misery of bad bosses. So let's focus on that list then.
Oh, the first one for me, and it's hardly surprising because we bang on about it all the time, but a good boss is very clear on purpose. They're absolutely sure where they want to be going. They're very clear with you where they want to be going. They name what good looks like. We're going in this direction. And that's great, but the really good ones, I would argue, do that about something that their teams can get excited about.
On this one, we definitely completely overlap on that. But I do think it's a nuance on what you said. It's what good looks like as well. So I think, yes, having a clear, bold, compelling vision that they get everyone engaged in, that's part of it. Some of the best bosses I've worked for are very clear on what good looks like for me and for what good looks like for my team, which I think takes a lot of the ambiguity and the the politics and the trying to figure out stuff out of it.
And actually, a lot of frustrations at work are when people are clashing over what the purpose is. So I don't think we need to dwell on that one so much.
Just on that, James, I worked in the same organisation, right, for a while. And for the first, I think probably 2 years, right, we had a clear purpose. We had a burning platform and we had to solve that. And the whole organisation was galvanised around that. Year 3, we had solved the problem and we didn't clarify a new direction. And the organisation started to meander a little bit. People's different agendas started to creep in and their politics started to creep in and the games playing started to creep in and, things really started to drift. Then when we restated what we were there for, again, back on. So it was the same people, same situation. It just really depended on whether we had coalesced around a purpose.
Collaborate much more if they've coalesced around a purpose, which just means the working relationship better. Early in my career, I worked in research and development, and I worked for a boss, and he was golden so long as you were doing something that was innovative. Makes sense when you're working in research and development. Yeah. He moved on. We then got a new boss, and she was only interested in cost savings. Do what you like, as long as you're saving the organisation money. What was interesting there was the team. You go work in R&D, it's because you like innovative stuff. It's not because you like cost saving stuff. So everybody, it didn't appeal to the team. So I think there were two things to it. She was clear about the purpose, but it wasn't something the team could really get behind or were excited about. So it's those two things, clarity of purpose and it being something that people could feel they were doing good with.
And just on that second bit, James, was that where you built up started your allergy towards cost-saving initiatives?
Futile in the extreme. I told you the story about Forest Mars. Yeah, I've told you I worked for Mars. I'm sure you've heard that bit. But I worked.
We spent the first 12 months of working together, and everyone used to take the piss out of you. James, when I worked for Mars, Lawther.
I have met one of the Mars brothers, Forest Mars. It's a privately owned business. And these guys were billionaires. And there's this damn fool Yank wandering around the plant. It was just the most god-awful jumper you've ever seen in your entire life. It was a crime against style. And I said to my boss at the time, I said, who the hell's the Yank in the jumper? And he said, oh, that's Forest Mars. Okay. Anyway, I only had one conversation with Forest Mars. And that's where he took me aside and he said, James, what you don't realise is you don't save yourself rich. And then he turned tail and walked off. That's the only conversation I've ever had with a billionaire, American or otherwise. But that is one of the reasons why I'm a bit anti-cost saving. But let's move on. He was a very good boss in that regard. He knew where he was going. Very clear.
Very clear.
So go on then. We defined what good looks like. So what would be your next thing?
You worked in an environment where they wanted more innovation. People want more of this. This is changing. The world is changing. All of those things require a level of experimentation and testing. When stuff goes wrong, how do you respond to it? A good boss will respond to it positively and help the teams and the people learn from what's gone wrong. A bad boss goes and seeks out the villains of the piece and starts casting blame, which immediately creates defensiveness and a complete unwillingness to experiment and learn.
It's not just about innovation. Stuff goes wrong. You've got competitors doing things. You've got people in other departments doing things. You can't control it all. You're a fool if you think it would, yeah? You've got the old Mr. Six Sigma coming in, but you've got variation going on left, right, center. You cannot control it. Stuff goes wrong. I worked for a bloke once who was Anyway, when things went wrong, particularly if it got to his boss, he finds somebody in his team to blame.
Really?
For God's sake. So how did that go? A, you wouldn't tell him when things had gone wrong, and B, everybody thought he was tough. And there is that thing, about when you're, fortunately I've never done it, but in the First World War, when they were fighting in the trenches, how many people are you getting over the top of the trench for? And this guy wasn't one. So there you go. Don't blame people. Stop looking for villains. So totally agree with that one.
Just on that last point, I think that, willingness to unlock the discretionary effort for a boss, I think that's always a good measure of a good boss. If you find yourself running through walls for someone.
I think that is a very good test. Yeah.
Well, anyhow, next
I
one.
think a good boss isn't just focused on their bit of the organisation. They stand back and they look at the whole picture. And they're in a better position to do that than you are because they are the boss. Well, linked to what we've just said, all the activities that happen in an organization, they're all linked. They don't happen in isolation. Yeah. And so if you want things to run smoothly, having a boss who can stand back and look and understand the bits upstream and downstream is really all important. So I'll give you an example. That's a very obvious example. One organization I worked for, I was in charge of complaints, would you believe? Right. So I've got a team handling complaints. They had a target, some ridiculous target. 80% of complaints had to be handled in 14 days. It's ridiculous. We never got anywhere near. And that'd be very easy to jump up and down on people's heads and say, well, why didn't you get the complaints? What's stopping? The reality is they were handled by a call center somewhere else, where they'd incidentally put in some cost-saving initiatives, and then they just dribbled through as and when they could get by to us. But once you stand back and you look and you understand the system and understand what's going on, then you can start to act and smooth things out, which the people who are working for you don't have the opportunity to do. So I think that's the thing I'd say, pay attention to what's going on and look at the wider picture.
Another angle to being a good boss is when you start off your career, invariably you have a deep level expertise in quite a narrow field. That's often what happens to us. And then you build your reputation. When I worked for a betting company initially, I knew everything about the customers and the events and the stuff that we're doing. So I was successful because I had deep expertise in that. And then all of a sudden you get promoted to a level where the breadth of what you're looking after, you can't have that same deep expertise that you once made your name on. The change for me with somebody who's a good boss is are they able to do that pivot where you're going deep on something and all of a sudden you've got to go really shallow on lots of things. Now, the implication of that is you're not going to know everything, so it can be a little bit uncomfortable when you're used to being a deep expert. And secondly, you have to build up levels of trust and ability to ask the right questions of the people who are the deep experts. Otherwise, you had no value, just get in their way. So I think, it links to that, see the whole picture, but how do you manage that breadth versus depth?
Well, yeah. And so I think that links really nicely to my next point, which is a really good boss asks questions and doesn't think he's got all the answers. It's not about his or her ego. They realize that they don't know anything and they spend their time asking questions of finding out what's going on.
And we just should also plug the episode we did with Rainbird last year on the power questions. It's worth having a look at that because that is a really underused skill.
One of my bosses, he had this lovely acronym. He said, James, you've got to remember the acronym WAIT.
Right, what's that stand for?
WAIT, why am I talking?
I like it.
It's very similar to what my wife says to me, which is why are you talking? But it's really powerful, right? Because a really good boss knows what they know. They should be far more interested in what you know, because that they will learn something. So some really, simple questions a good boss will ask them, things like, what would make it easier? Well, what's getting in the way? As opposed to, why aren't you doing that? And it linked a wee bit to that point about blame, but just that whole thing about understanding. A really powerful question I used to use was, how can I help? Or what would you like me to do? And most bosses don't say that because they're scared that they have to do the whole load of extra work. But the reality is people like to be self-determining. They want to take control of their own destiny. So as the act of saying, how can I help? They invariably say, well, it's all right. I think we've got it covered. We don't need your help. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'd argue that with that slightly, James. I don't think they're motivated by not wanting extra work. I think they're motivated by the fact that a lot of people think they know the answer. The reason they don't ask questions is because they're too busy telling people what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. That ego of whether it's born out of arrogance or insecurity, in other words, I'm the boss, I should know the answer, shouldn't I? It still comes across the same way.
Humility is a fabulous thing, right? Yeah, and there's that quote, isn't it? If you're a good boss, your job is to make the room smarter, not to be the smartest person in the room. So how do you get all that information out? And it's about asking questions and burying your ego. So I think that makes a good boss.
And one that we almost certainly will disagree with each other on, I think you've got to build and maintain relationships with your team. And
Are you wrong,
I
mate? They're
think
just a
it's
bunch of spreadsheets. You need to cheat your team like spreadsheets and you'll be okay.
yeah. But in all seriousness, I think people want to have individual relationships, and their boss is a really important relationship. So ask yourself, do you know stuff about your team members, kids, their partners, their pets, what they get up to outside of work? It means a lot when you say to somebody, I don't know, it sounds trite, but how's your dog? I know your dog's been ill, how's Bear doing? It means a lot to somebody. Whether you care deeply about the future of their dog, whether you've ever met their dog, it's almost irrelevant. It is just being interested in them as a person, because A, that will matter to them, and B, it creates an environment where they feel like they're important, you care for them.
They need to be relevant. So I know, but this is important. You're absolutely right. It's very important because people need to matter. And there's another bit to this as well, which is a little bit more transactional, but it's very easy to think you understand what your team's motivations are and what their desires are and who'll want this project and who wants to do that.
Yeah.
But you don't know. If somebody's having a divorce or they've got, it's very different to somebody having a poorly child. Their motivations and their actions will be totally different. So understanding about your team is all important. I totally agree.
And equally, you need to let them understand you. So we tend to try and be this absolutely perfect, nothing ever goes wrong for me, I can handle everything, show no vulnerability, whereas actually you've got to let people get to know you a little
totally
bit.
Agree. A lot of management is about measures, and actually the way you as a boss use measures is all important, I think. So if you use them carefully, I think that can put you in a really strong position. Right?
Yeah.
And it's your point about understanding. Using measures to understand what's going on and help test things and try things, absolutely important.
What you mean? You mean setting targets?
Using targets.
Trigger alert. Trigger alert.
But, targets just bugger things up. The number of times I've had a boss give me a target and it's been, on an objective or something like that. And it's some mundane thing, but because it's been written in PowerPoint, and we've got to hit this flipping number, and just that complete lack of understanding of what's going on and just the obsession with hitting the target because hitting the target makes you look good. Right? So using measures is all important, but just getting obsessed about targets is a bit pointless.
We did an episode early on about what gets measured gets done, so it's worth checking that out. But would it help your therapy if we did an episode on targets? Just allowed you to get out of your system.
Pointless targets. But I think the thing here is teamwork is more important than targets. So you set in people individual targets and individual measures, but that's not what being a boss is about. The point about being a boss is to coordinate and get to teamwork. So I think understanding metrics and using them to understand where things are going badly and what we need to do differently, all important. But if you care more about the metric than the behaviour, I think you've got a bit of a problem.
Next one is back to that environment you create around your team. In today's world, if you're going to be successful, you've got to be improving. You can't stand still. There's always relentless need for better performance or new innovation or stuff that's happening in the market. It's never ending. And the only way you can really tackle that successfully is to create an environment where people can learn. And so that's about being open, observing, listening to people, looking up, looking out, looking around, and learning and encouraging your team to do the same.
I think so few managers realise that their staff want to improve their lot. They want to get better. And the only way you can do that is by learning. I totally agree. The alternative, of course, is just to sit in your hands and not bloody do anything. But your staff won't like that. So it is about moving forward in the direction you've talked about and learning, improving stuff, seeing what works and seeing what doesn't. Which then, of course, leads us back to that whole point about observing, going and flipping, looking. So I think it's all important.
Yeah. And I think one of the good challenges, if you're running a team of people, and ask yourself how much time you've spent this week sitting next to somebody while they do their work. You know, just observing what's going on, chatting to them about what they're doing, and not just your direct reports, but the people frontline serving your customers or executing your process, whatever it is that you're doing. Have you observed them doing their work this week? Because that's where you learn ultimately what's really going on.
There was a management guy, and he said, the 3 things of a good manager does is purpose, which we talked about, or direction.
Yeah.
Space and resources. How do you know you're getting people the right resources if you don't know what they're doing? Being close enough to understand it without telling people what to do, absolutely all important, which brings us back to the whole point about learning. But you don't get the learning, of course, if you haven't got an environment in which people trust you.
And equally, you've got to trust people that they can get on and do their job, trust their capability. They've got to trust you on how you're going to react to things. So back to your point about the boss who, always threw somebody under the bus. Well, he had zero trust with his team. They didn't trust him to not throw them under the bus. So funny enough, they'd never tell him what was going on.
We're getting to the other thing, my other trigger word here, which is performance management. But, if you can't trust your staff, if they are useless, get rid of them. Don't hang back, just get shot of them. But you need to be in a position where for your team, you hire people that you could trust and you can let them go on with it. Because you haven't got time to be doing everything else.
Yeah, and just one small point, James. We've done 2 episodes on performance management and it's still, deeply triggered. So I don't think the therapy of doing podcasts works.
We do it targets and performance management, double header, moving myself away from it. It's this thing about treating people fairly and just respectfully. Here's a story for you. We had one organisation I worked for. They had a stupid rule. There were lots of people travelling everywhere and trains get delayed, and there was the whole delay repay thing. You can claim money back on the train. So HR put out a rule, right, which was that if you were delayed on a company paid for train, you had to make the reclaim, and then you had to reclaim.
No, you're not going to say it. You are.
I kid you not. This is what that was the expenses rule. And I had a guy come talk to me, and he said, I don't travel as much as you do, James, but 200 quid's worth of vouchers because I keep getting stuck in Manchester at 11 o'clock at night when I'm trying to get home. And I just thought to myself, hey, go and spend the money. Take your wife somewhere. You have that money. Because it's absolutely out of order for the company to think it's okay that if you're sitting there at 11 o'clock at night on some bloody train that's not moving, you're going to all of the pain. The company's got the rights to have that money. That very act of treating people fairly, it does a huge lot for what the teams think of you.
You can get your money back for your ticket. Does that suddenly make your company more successful, more profitable? Because I guarantee you the £200 that you got back from his vouchers versus how much you pissed him off cost you
absolutely.
a lot more than 200
It's
quid.
very easy. That whole point about, trust is very easy to dissolve some trust by pissing people about. So, which leads us quite nicely on to, I think, my next one, which I talked about in the past, which is the whole management umbrella. So a good boss, I think a really good boss stops people from getting wet, but they should know it's raining. So it's just that whole balance of shielding off the corporate excess and shielding off the organisational barons who are jumping up and down, whilst at the same time getting people to realise it's a bit painful. So I think that's quite an important role of a good boss.
Yeah. So where does that lead us?
Well, I don't know. I suppose you've got to pick your favourite things. What would your summary be?
Well, the interesting thing going through this episode is there's loads of stuff out there about good bosses and bad bosses and all that sort of stuff. So we're just giving today our take on what we think makes a good boss.
Oh, well, hang on. Just before we go, let's not decry it. Between us, we've had the thick end of 70 years worth of working for people. So,
we know our stuff, but we have definitely had some horrors and we've had some very good bosses. So, I'm just saying that there is like a volume of material out there. If anyone wants to explore it more, knock yourselves out. So go on, James, what were your top takeaways from today's discussion?
I think the one that's really important for me is a bit biblical, but, treat people the way you'd like to be treated yourself. Nothing very clever about it, but that I think is a really important thing. The second thing I think is just ask, don't tell. Because you know what you know. But if you ask people, you'll be amazed what you can learn. get people the things they need to do their job. I mean, a lot of being a good boss is just about getting people the resources they need, and also just the ability to stand back and look at the big picture and help people negotiate their way through the organisation. So those would be my 4 things.
I think the good things, I would have a
No, there's a
slight
go. You're
nuance
going
on
to
that
disagree with
first
me,
one.
are you? Go on.
Yeah. Well, no, not actually disagree, but I think you should treat people as they would like to be treated, not how you like to be treated. Because if you take you and me, we're completely different, right? And we'd like certain things. If you always treated people as if they were James Lawler, Jesus Christ, that would piss them off after a little while. You know what I mean? So it's back to my point about, I think, understanding people as individuals. I think the second thing for me is just, I'd agree. I think creating that real sense of direction, getting people bought into that sense of direction, I think is massively important. One area, which is a passion of yours, which is just understand how the environment impacts the people that are working for you. Because I think we overestimate, or certainly I've been guilty of overestimating the importance that the people have versus the system that's around them. And the system around them can boost them up or stop them dead. But unless you are conscious about that, you can get people as G'd up and ready and capable and fired up as you want. If the system completely takes them off their knees, they're not going to get very far. So I think understanding that environment, and the fourth one for me was really listen more, tell less.
So final thoughts. I think really, when I would say this, right, but it's all about the system. So I just think as a boss, your job is to create an environment where people can do their best work. Said it before, I'll say it again, but that's the job. It's not to tell people what to do. It's about creating that environment.
Yeah, and like I say, James, that was one of the points I brought out. I guess I have a bit more of a view that it's a balance between getting people fired up and capable and the system itself. And if you can do both of those, you'll be golden.
Super. So we don't need any feedback on how good we were as bosses. Thank you very much. If you've got those sorts of comments, you can keep them to yourself.
Which part of the good bosses was that? Is that being open? No, that was learning.
I'm too old to be learning now. Yeah.
Well, it's all right. You don't have any direct reports anymore, so you're all right.
Cool.
All right.
Speak to you later.
Thanks, everyone.
We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast, from purpose to corporate jargon, but always focused on one thing: getting the job done well. Easier said than done. So, if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck, if your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiralling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver, we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com
or James@ajobdonewell.com.